What are your most heated questions that you want answered about the British royal family? Let's get straight into it. Michelle Foster, F9V, says, have a nice holiday, Dan. Thank you. My question would be, what do you think will happen to Prince Harry when Meghan Markle dumps him and writes her divorce book? Well, he's in trouble, isn't he? He's in deep trouble now, Michelle, because he is having a breakdown in real time. We see it. He is completely unable to hide the totally complex feelings that come to the fore every time he is in public with Meghan Markle. In some ways, he does despise his wife. I mean, we saw that on the recent Middle Eastern tour when he was constantly rejecting her attempt at public displays of affection because he knows that what she's doing is like ownership. It's not about love. It's not about affection. It's about ownership, and it's about showing the world who is in control. And he can't stand that, and he cannot pretend that he can put up with it anymore. That is a really distinct change in tone. But, and this is a big but, Harry has gone all in with this woman, and he knows that. And he knows it's not simple to turn back the clock. And he knows that in lots of ways there is no going back. Look at the age of the children, the fact that she would retain custody of them, even after a divorce that was instigated by her. That's the way that the Californian system works. So many people were warning Harry, do not take these, well, at the time it was one child, Archie. Do not take Archie to California with this woman because you're never going to get him back. And then the divorce book, that is the most extraordinary development for me. Now, you know, for a long time, people like me were reporting that Meghan Markle had a plan. She had a post-divorce plan that was being instigated very early on because I think she thought it would have happened by now. Of course, I guess she didn't realize how much Harry was going to be trapped into this horrible new life as a Montecito miserable prisoner. But it was once Vanity Fair. You know, Vanity Fair, like a mainstream American publication which uses fact checkers and really will only report on things that are very much agreed by the establishment Hollywood consensus or the New York consensus. And it was once Vanity Fair, and that cover article on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle revealed that, yes, a post-divorce book was being pitched by Meghan Markle to publishers. And he still just accepted her lies. And the fact that she just brushed it off. Oh, no, it's all rubbish. And it's like, at that point, you know, he is so far gone because the warning signs are there. So look, once it happens, he will clearly be in a very bad way, but he's in such a bad way already. I mean, can it really get any worse? Maybe, yes, given what that post-divorce book could contain. And of course, that is another huge risk for Prince Harry. If he pushes her too far, then he thinks, oh my God, what is she going to say about me? So the whole situation is just a complete mess, but it is a mess of Harry's own making. And what I think will happen to him now is not some great welcome back, we love you. I think that's changed. I mean, do you remember a time when Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was the great hero of the British public? He had fought in the Falklands War. He was viewed as being handsome and someone who was a real asset, not just to the British royal family, but to the monarchy. His behavior changed the way that we viewed him forever. And Harry's behavior changes the way that we view him forever. I do think there would be some people who would say, well, it was all down to Meghan Markle. And of course, to an extent, that is true. But Harry wrote those words in spare. Not literally, but, you know, he allowed those words written on his behalf in spare to go out. And I think for a lot of us, that was unforgivable with or without the influence of his wife. So what will happen to him? Well, maybe he would try and return more to the United Kingdom. We know he's already doing that. But would there be any great idea that he could retain his place in the British affections or go back to the type of YouGov polling that he once enjoyed. Where remember, Harry was really the only living member of was the only member of the British royal family able to outrank the late Queen in terms of the popularity stakes when she was still alive. So, no, what would happen to him? He'd probably spend more time here. He'd split his time and he'd hope to regain the affections of the British public. He'd obviously be a somewhat eligible bachelor, and there would very much be interest, of course, in his next girlfriend and whether he would make a big mistake. But do I think that he would return to any great role? No, because he has wasted the opportunity. And in some ways, and I'll say this for allies of Harry because I'm not an ally of Harry and I never have been, but in some ways, the saddest thing about the past few years is that Harry himself knew how important this time was. He said it himself. There was only this very small window when George was too young to really be seen as the future. That was the short period that Harry had, and he's blowing it. He's blowing it for a woman. But this is the true Harry. He's a nasty guy. So, he is a nasty guy. Honestly, I know lots of you believe that Harry totally changed as a result of Meghan Markle. And of course, he became a lot worse because she empowered him. But he was not a nice guy. He never was, okay? He was always rude. He was always arrogant. He was always entitled. So much of this was an act. Anyway, let's move on to Marianne Pulteney 4096, who says, why is it so difficult for the monarchy to demand DNA tests on Meghan's children? So let me be very clear on this. Of course, the monarchy could make whatever demand they wanted, but it wouldn't be a demand that Harry and the two children had to fulfill. We know that Charles is never going to ask for that. He's never even expressed an interest in removing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in terms of their titles and in terms of the line of succession where Harry and the two children remain in. I think certainly when it comes to the children, maybe Harry too, certainly without the backup, I guess, the evidential backup that would be required by law for them to stay in the line of succession. But you say, why is it so difficult for the monarchy to demand DNA tests? Well, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, at the moment, the monarchy has no desire to do that because the monarchy is run by King Charles and he doesn't even want to go down that path. But let's park that. Let's say William comes to the throne and he did want to go down this path. Well, he can make the demand. They don't have to agree to the demand. But obviously the assumption would be if they didn't agree to the demand, that there was an issue in terms of the DNA, and William could then move to ask his Prime Minister to strip Harry and Meghan from the line of succession. But it's not simple in terms of how this is proven. I mean, you'll remember in the past, the way around this was that the serving Home Secretary used to attend every royal birth. And it didn't happen because, like so many modernizations, I guess the woke and the wet took over and thought, well, that's terrible. But no, it should always have happened because look at what Harry and Meghan have done. Or look at what they have potentially done. They have potentially misled the world and misled the British royal family, and they've been allowed to do so because the Home Secretary was not required to be at the birth. And the Home Secretary needed to see that baby, okay? And where that baby came from. And they didn't. So I would argue that woke and wet reversal of a policy which was in place to protect the line of succession should have been there and still should be there to avoid a potential cover-up like the one that we're seeing. Oh, sorry, Marianne, I've got really wound up now. You wound me up. But that's why it's difficult. Do you see what I'm saying? It's difficult for so many reasons. And it would have to be an act of parliament, of course, that did remove the children from the line of succession for whatever reason. But you know, as I have explained previously, William has his own plan as to how he can do this without having to go down the DNA path. Sally Waters, this is such an interesting question, Sally, and I'm really glad you asked it because I don't think people think about this enough. She writes, what if William was to decide he didn't want the top job? It's all too much and just wanted a family life.
I need you to do something for me right now. It is free, it is easy, it is simple. Just hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That's because over 50% of you watching this video haven't done that yet.
And honestly, when I see the people who are constantly and consistently attacking Prince William, especially the likes of the wicked witches of the Daily Mail working on behalf of the nasty Buckingham Palace press PR operation like Amanda Platel and Liz Jones, who find any excuse to trash William, I just honestly think sometimes we do need to take a step back and think we are lucky to have William, and we are lucky that William has his commitment to the British royal family, because without that commitment, and if William were to convince his children to also ask to be removed from the line of succession, or effectively say that they did not want to serve, well, that is the end of the British monarchy, because then you do have Prince Harry as king and Meghan Markle as queen. Or if they chose not to, King Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. That is the reality. And William and his family are so important. And it is why, even though there are lots of things, by the way, that I don't agree with William on, like certain traditional things, certain political things, certain woke things, certain ideas and the future about the Commonwealth or the Queen of England, the Church of England, even though there's all of that, I do give William quite a lot of leeway on those issues, because I'm like, we need him. And William, given what happened with Diana, could have so easily just decided, nah, this is not for me. And we would have been left with Harry, and that would have been a complete disaster. And instead what he's done is he said, I am going to do this in my own way. You are going to have to follow me. You're not always going to agree with me, but I'm going to do this in my own way. And as a result of that, I am going to deliver you 3 well-brought up, well-balanced children who are the future of the monarchy and who you can trust to be the future of the monarchy. That is so important. And I do think very often that role that William and Catherine have chosen to take is undermined, because all the time you have those wicked witches and other critics of William pointing out, oh, he does fewer royal engagements than Princess Anne or King Charles. And it's like, yes, but there's a different goal with William. He's a modern guy. You know, William is the same age as me. I'm the same age as William and Catherine. And we are in quite an interesting generation, because we like straddle, so to speak, the two generations. You know, we straddle the old media generation and the new media generation. And I think William understands that it is the new media generation that is not engaged in the British royal family that is going to have to get engaged in some way in order for survival. And he wants to do modernization. I mean, he said modernization with a small m, but he does want to do it, and that is why. And so if William were to decide, I mean, I'm going to answer your question very directly, Sally, because I want to be direct today, and I so appreciate your questions, and they're thought-provoking too. But if William were to decide he didn't want the top job and it's all too much and he wanted a family life, what happens? Well, what happens is the British royal family is screwed. It's screwed. Because it's King Harry and Queen Meghan, and trust me, they want that. That is what they want. It's what they've always wanted. It's what they've always hoped will happen. It's why they cling on to dear life to their royal titles, because they haven't ruled out the possibility of William making that change. So I know, Sally, you are not saying this, but I'm talking about the critics of William. Just for one moment, think about the consequences if he did make that decision, which would be a human decision that anyone could make at any point. I do think, though, William's really driven by Diana, and I know he doesn't talk about it much. But remember Princess Diana's sole purpose, and she took this to be her sole purpose post-divorce, was to prepare William to be king. And Harry was meant to be there as the constant strength and stay for William. And that's why I think she would be so disappointed, because she knew how important his role was going to be. In the same way that Princess Margaret, and I know she was derided for a whole load of reasons, and you could argue that a bit like Harry and a bit like Andrew, she was a spare, and so she became a bit wayward and her life was lacking in purpose. But what was the purpose of Princess Margaret's life? It was to be a constant, steadfast support for Queen Elizabeth II in the same way that her mother was. And I do think Margaret fulfilled that role. Did she have lots of tragedies in her life and was treated very badly by certain men. And obviously, I think it was a great tragedy that she couldn't marry Townsend, the love of her life. Let's not go into Margaret here. But the point that I'm making is that William knew what Diana wanted for him. Harry let Diana down, and in turn the British public down and the Commonwealth down. I don't think William would want to do that. So I think that's why we should have hope. Okay, very specific and interesting question here from Jenny J3X7E. When William becomes king, who will be his councillors of state? And I had to do a little bit of research on this because, of course, it all depends on when he becomes king, because it depends on the ages of his children. But let's assume that we're talking about him becoming king before Charlotte and Louis are 21 and before George is 18, because that's how it works, or that's my belief in how it works. George becomes a councillor of state once he's 18 because he is the direct heir apparent, whereas I think Charlotte and Louis have to be 21. But because at this point, and this is where the human side of this becomes difficult, right? Because look at Charles's health. I think probably William will become king before George is 18. But obviously, I'm not saying we hope that happens, long live the king. I do believe that. But assuming that happens, William's councillors of state are determined by the Regency Act 1937, as amended by the Councillors of State Act 2022, which provided some additional councillor of states because of the problematic fact that Prince Harry and then Prince Andrew were councillors of state. And so that Regency Act includes the sovereign's spouse and the next 4 eligible adults in the line of succession, plus the 2 additional lifetime appointees named in the 2022 Act. So here are the councillors of state. The first one you're going to love, right? Because it's Catherine, the Queen at that time. Queen Catherine would be a councillor of state, which would be so great because, of course, she is not a blood royal, which does limit certain things for her, like being in the line of succession. But as the number 1 councillor of state, could you think of a better person to be able to act on behalf of the king if for some reason he were incapacitated? No, that's who you want. But then it does, become problematic because it's Harry, it's Andrew, and it's the Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. Just doesn't work, does it? But you do have to wait until George turns 18, and then he would obviously be bumped right up. By the way, I should point out Princess Anne and Prince Edward were the 2 additional appointments made as Councillor of State as a result of that 2022 Act. My assumption is that William would lean on them if necessary. So the Councillors of State in practice would be Catherine, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward. But it is possible, given that so much that was previously off the table after Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's recent travails are now back on the table. So it is possible, I believe, that there could be an act of parliament to actually remove Harry, Andrew, Beatrice and Eugenie as councillors of state, which would limit it to those 3 until William's children were old enough to take on that role. Okay, hope that clears that up. Danielle, B8P1K, says, thank you, Dan, for all your coverage on the royal family. That is a real pleasure. And my question is, do you think the Queen had any inkling what would happen to AMW, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, after she passed? No, I don't, Danielle. I really don't. That's not how the late Queen thought. She wasn't a woman who really countenanced her legacy all that much because she was about duty of the day, service every day of her life, but not thinking about what's going to happen after I'm gone. Really, she wasn't big on that. She wasn't. Like, she did want Andrew to be looked after, absolutely, but she also appreciated the reality of how the British monarchy works. As a hereditary monarchy, she knew that it would be Charles's monarchy and that she could only hope he would do the right thing by her second son. But I also believe that she thought Andrew was telling her the truth. I'm very confident of that, actually. I did a lot of reporting on this for a long time. I was the person who broke the story the morning after Andrew's catastrophic Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, which we could all see had been a total disaster. And a source close to Andrew told me he was going with the Queen to church that morning, which was a usual thing on a Sunday morning. But he was going to church for a victory lap. He actually told the late Queen Elizabeth II that the interview had been a great success, that it had gone swimmingly. Now, maybe the late Queen at that moment thought that her son had done a good job, but I mean, she soon knew that wasn't the case, and we saw what happened afterwards. But, you know, there were messages that the late Queen sent to the world, and I think the biggest message where she was stressing to us all to believe in Andrew's innocence was when at Prince Philip's memorial service, she needed someone to usher her down the aisle to her seat, and it was Andrew who did so. And lots of people at the time were trying to say, oh no, he was just the first available. No. That was her message to the world. She did believe Andrew was innocent. So no, I don't think she had any inkling what would happen. Obviously, the payoff to Virginia Giuffre, and I do think I think the payoff is a disaster. Don't get me wrong. I think the payoff is a terrible, terrible thing for the British royal family and for King Charles to have to deal with. But I also do believe that the payoff is nuanced, because the payoff was made specifically, and I remember I reported it at the time in a lot of detail. The payoff was made because of the Platinum Jubilee, and because of the fact that the Platinum Jubilee could not be overshadowed by the idea of Andrew in court up against Virginia Giuffre in a civil court in the United States of America. But in hindsight, given what we know, given what was in the Epstein emails, I think the idea of fighting Giuffre in court would have been a fool's errand for Andrew, would have been a catastrophic mistake. So do I think the Queen had an inkling of how bad this would get? No, I don't. Actually, I really don't. Okay, MNY76 asks, if a senior member is dating, what kind of intelligence is done in advance to help ensure that the person has no skeletons in their past or potential concerns that could damage the crown? To be frank with you, MNY, nothing really. Nothing really. It doesn't operate in that way. Now, we saw with Meghan Markle that there were loads of members, senior members of the royal family who had great concerns about Meghan Markle because of not just what they'd heard about her or what they'd read about her or what people had reported of her behavior, but because of what they saw themselves. I mean, she didn't really hide it, but at the end of the day, there wasn't some big background check exercise that was done because there was not going to be any telling to Harry. So the members of the royal family tried their best. You know, the late Queen Elizabeth said, please just slow down, Harry. Prince William said, please just slow down, Harry. You know, he didn't want to listen. And to me, probably one of the passages in Spare, Harry's autobiography, that stands out more than most. And it's weird, it never got much coverage at the time. I think it's probably because it was more nuanced. I spoke about it a lot, but I guess it was not as dramatic as like the dog bowl fight that wasn't with Prince William or the horrible things he said about Camilla. But it was Harry in some detail recounting when he had to ask the late Queen Elizabeth permission to marry Meghan Markle, because that really was the last perfunctory way that the royal family could have stopped this marriage taking place. There was still this rule. And Harry makes it clear in the book, even when it was the late Queen, he didn't respect that. He didn't respect having to ask his grandmother. He thought it was anachronistic and something that was just really inappropriate for him to have to do. But he's very nervous about doing it, and he thinks about it a lot, and they're on a shoot, and he thinks that he's grabbing the late Queen at the right time. And her response is so underwhelming. It's basically like, yeah, I can't really stop you. Do what you want. And that is how she felt. She'd given up at that point. She knew control had been lost. And Harry didn't really take the lessons from his family, who were desperate for him not to rush into an engagement and a marriage. So is there any formal type of intelligence that's done not in a way that would have any realistic chance of changing the course of history? Okay, last question now from Kathleen Carter 7231, who asks, how will William and Kate prepare George, Charlotte and Louis for when their father becomes king? There hasn't been young children of a monarch in an extremely long time. And of course there hasn't. And, you know, I think probably, even though she wasn't really a woman who reflected and did a lot of regrets, but probably the late Queen Elizabeth II, I imagine, would have regretted some of the early years where she very much did focus on travel and was separated from her children for a long period of time. And so, of course, what we have seen with William is that all of what he does as a dad is to try and give these three children as balanced a life as possible. Now, look, a lot of that is just because he's a great father, right? Like, I don't want to try and say, oh, he's putting them through some type of royal boot camp. It's not about that. It really isn't. I think William understands that the more balanced upbringing they have, which, let's be honest, is something that him and Harry never had.
The video suggests that Prince Harry experienced an emotional collapse, supposedly linked to his marriage with Meghan Markle. It also introduces the idea of post-divorce threats, implying that serious conflict may already be unfolding behind the scenes. These types of videos usually rely on short clips from interviews, public appearances, or speeches. Moments where Harry appears emotional, serious, or reflective are often highlighted and then framed as something more extreme, like a breakdown. It's important to make a distinction here. Showing emotion in public, especially when discussing personal or family issues, is not the same as having a breakdown. Prince Harry has spoken openly about his experiences, and that openness can sometimes be misinterpreted when taken out of context. The mention of post-divorce threats is one of the most dramatic parts of the title. However, there is no widely confirmed or credible evidence supporting the idea that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are making threats against each other or even heading toward a divorce. This type of narrative is often created by combining separate ideas, emotional clips, rumors about relationships, and hypothetical scenarios, and presenting them as one connected story. This can make the situation seem far more serious than it actually is. Words like collapse, breakdown, and threats are very powerful. They immediately grab attention and create urgency. But they can also distort reality by suggesting confirmed events when, in many cases, they are just interpretations. What we can confirm is that Prince Harry has spoken publicly about personal challenges and his relationship with the royal family. However, there is no verified evidence of a real-time breakdown or any post-divorce threats involving Meghan Markle. In the end, this video appears to take real moments and amplify them into a much bigger and more dramatic story. As always, it's important to separate what's actually confirmed from what's being suggested. What do you think? Are these claims believable or just another example of media exaggeration? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more breakdowns.